As many of you might know from the first attempt at this Government Relations Live, we like to get right into the issue, in and out, without a lot of introductory material or content. And so that's what we're going to do today. Again, Cindy Gallagher here at SAANYS, and I am so pleased that Assistant Commissioner Zachary Warner, I've known Zach for a number of years, agreed to come right on. So kudos, Zach, for when I just said, hey, we have a lot of members who have some concerns over what has happened this week. Would you mind hopping on for just a little while with our membership? And he cleared his calendar and he's here with us today. We're going to take certainly want to provide Zach an opportunity to explain to us what did happen this week with the 3 through 8 testing. Talk a little bit about what districts, clarify what districts were asked to do or not asked to do. And then I want to give us a little bit of opportunity, not necessarily to, I'm sure Zach has heard more than his fair share of many comments from all sorts of educators across the state, which he should have, and he's very willing to talk about that. But at the end, maybe for us to jump in for a few minutes to talk about what you all may anticipate as the fallout from some of the things that you noticed this week. So Zach, with that, thank you again. I truly appreciate it. I know that you have been spending many, many hours on this and are as chagrined and frustrated as many, I'm sure, of our members who hopped on with this Zoom session. So perhaps you could give us a little tour of what really happened, talk a little bit about what you saw from your perspective and what you at least tried to do. So I'm going to turn it right over to you, Zach.
That sounds great. Thanks, Cindy. And good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity. I see a lot of familiar faces. Nice to see folks. And so, yeah, I certainly appreciate the opportunity. I am always a believer, if we've worked together before, that information is helpful. One, in a vacuum of information, misinformation can fill that, but also many of you are on the front lines of this. So, your experience is valid, then we need to, address that. So let's start with the big point, and I'm sure you've seen our emails, you've seen our communications, just to kind of get it out of the way, no one thinks this is acceptable. That's been very clear from commissioner statements, from my own emails, that, failure of any sort, especially when it impacts our kids, is not acceptable. The department has been very clear on that. There will be contractual ramifications, other stuff that really is kind of outside the scope of this contract, but we did not find a single bit of this acceptable, and we've apologized, on behalf of ourselves, as well as forced our vendor to put an apology because of this impact. So, I don't want anyone, I'm going to try to give you some information and talk about where we go from here, but I certainly want it led with the fact that this is a completely unacceptable situation. So talking a little bit about that, we started on Tuesday with basically, and I'm one, not a tremendous technical person, but also don't need to bore you with too many details, but I do want to give you a sense, because at the end of this, I'm going to tell you that we are that the system is good, and I want to have walked you through so you know why I'm saying that and why you might consider, taking my word for that. And maybe even a little more, I could share some specific details with you, so it's not just my word. So on Tuesday, basically what had happened was a server configuration. And again, there are probably networking people on here that know this far more than I, but it's called connection pooling, where it is all about knocking on the front door to get kids into the test. And so basically, due to a setting, there were too many people lining up at the front door, and that's why you were seeing login issues. For the most part, and I'm not making a sweeping statement because I know there are situations that are exception, for the most part, once students were successfully in and testing, they were able to complete it. On Tuesday, we tested 73,000 kids. We tested 160,000 kids on Wednesday. We tested 125,000 kids today. That, of course, was not a universal finding, and that just has to do with server traffic. But so that was the initial problem. NWA responded at that time by increasing server capacity. Many of you know, I've heard us say, this is Amazon Web Services. We use the same servers that are done with, when you use Netflix, when you use that, we use those services. They dialed that up, having seen. One thing I'll be completely transparent about was at that time, we were notified that this was a problem by a capacity alarm. So we have monitoring, and an alarm went off that said, hey, things are starting to slow down. By that point, your schools were starting to have issues. I do need to say, and I'm going to clarify this this is a statement that some people take well, some people don't. This did not affect everyone. And in fact, as I just gave you very, very big numbers, what I am saying to you and what I want you to take away from my conversation is, if this impacted you and your kids, that's all that matters. We've had people talking about, well, I heard this, I'm here so that you hear it from me. And if this impacted you, we need to work on that, and we need to support you and your school and your kids. But it is important that there were unaffected areas. There were a lot of unaffected areas. And so what happened is it started to back up, did that. What they did, as I said, was we increased server capacity. And so by Tuesday afternoon, things were running better on that increased server capacity. That is why, and I'll try not to make this personal to me, but I shared with Cindy before we got on, you got an email earlier in the day from our director of test administration saying there was a problem. You got an email at the end of the day saying there would not be a problem the next day. And that email had my name on it. And the reason it did is because I was told that and I believed that. So while I won't make this personal to me, I have expressed to NWA that, not only have they failed the state, but, they put me in an untenable position that I want to be able to stand in front of you and that I'm telling you the truth. And yesterday that was not the case. And I apologize for that. And also I find that unacceptable. So we were led to believe that the increased server capacity would solve that. Moving on to Wednesday, we encountered essentially the same issue, which was that what they call front loading. We were stuck at the door. At that point, the extra servers were still running. They did not shut anything down. It was not sufficient. They did, under that point, uncover the true cause of all solutions. And it really basically, like I said, had to do with connection pooling configuration, which I can't even say I fully understand what that is. But it had to do with making sure there's either a wide enough front door or enough front doors, however you want to conceptualize it, that everybody gets in without problems. And so once they corrected that, at about 10:30 yesterday morning, everything started to come down, CPU usage moved that, and we were not seeing these problems after that. And since then, with that correction, we have been seeing exactly the same. And so one of the things I want to share with you is that I have seen the internal graphs of that. At some points, we were topping out in 60, 70% of our server usage during the bad times. Today, when we tested 125,000 students, we topped out at one point, we made it slightly above 5% of server usage. So the issue is corrected. Everything is good moving forward. With that said, it impacted a lot of schools, and we've got a lot to support you with, to help you with, and move on there. So as you know, one of the things we've done is offer an extension to the window. If that is not something that works for you, that's certainly not required. It is just an option.
Zach, can I cut in right now, because it sounds like you're making a transition to that piece of what you were just talking about is telling us exactly what happened, and I deeply appreciate you taking the opportunity to go into some depth. Let me open it up to just a few questions from anybody about what actually happened. Does anybody need any further clarification or want any further clarification on what actually occurred, so that you understand it better, so that you can talk to your communities, your teachers, your parents, your students?
Well, I have several questions, but the first one would be, I guess, you don't think this is going to happen again, or how?
Ron, let's hold on to whether he can anticipate. I just want questions on what actually, do you understand the wording that he used to say what actually happened? Then Theron, I promise we'll get to that question, okay? I'm not trying to put you off, I'm just trying to make sure we're clear today.
Yeah, I just, one quick question, and I'm clear on the connectivity and the servers. I think for us, it seemed to be very localized to downstate and Long Island. So I would assume a lot of districts on Long Island have to speak to the fact that if it was only 10%, that was what we were told on Tuesday, why was it so localized to this particular area?
I don't know that it was, because it happened upstate as well.
Yeah, it was all upstate too.
So then that's information we're being given by BOCES, just in
Western New York.
regards, that's coming out that it was only 10%. And, we all have our groups that we're, different technology, superintendent groups, and it's a multiple Long Island districts. So we were kind of made to believe like, okay, maybe this was more localized, what's happening downstate potentially.
Zach, you want to take a stab at that and tell us
Absolutely.
the actual?
Yep. So a couple of things on that. One is, yeah, just to clarify for that too. Yes, this was happening that because it was truly a login issue. So it didn't matter where you were located. There's a couple of pieces of context that are important here. One is that it was happening at the student level. So we have a lot of schools that had 35 students in there and 4 students, let's say, started to get login issues and they said, whoa, everybody stop, we're having problems. Understand, I completely support that. Absolutely, that. But that meant your entire school shut down, which again, was probably, you make the right decision for your building. I'm not there, I'm not gonna second guess anybody's that. But that is in the system as 4 kids couldn't log in, other ones were able to. This was literally occurring at the student level, and it had to do with when you tried to knock on that door, was there enough room for you to fit through there? And so the 10%, and I do know that at least in more than one communication, it was billed as 10% of schools, and that's absolutely, to be clear, that is not an accurate statement. It was the 10% of students attempting to log in. And obviously that has a wider reaching sense. And like I said, I also, one kind of aside that was, I really do appreciate, and please share this with your teachers, folks, and stuff like that. The actions by educators and proctors and that were wonderful. By the time we were talking to people and they said, oh, this happened, we said, okay, you need to, and they said, oh no, we had everybody pause, we did this. So major appreciation for the care of the students and working on that.
Okay,
One
Zach,
other thing I'll say,
go ahead, you finish that, and then I want to go to Theron just for a quick second, but go ahead.
the last thing I was going to throw in, Cindy, is just, it'll help other things too, is that because this is so, I mentioned earlier, so because it was piling up at the login stage, but that was taxing the CPU. So I see some of you in the chat or have mentioned in other places are going, oh, but I had a situation when the kid was already in. That is understandable because the CPU at that point was overtaxed. And when it was trying to ping, it was overloaded trying to let people in the front door.
Okay, so now I think we have a fairly substantial idea of what actually happened. Theron, can you tell Zach the reason of the state and then your question based on the technical stuff?
No, I'm good on that, Cindy.
Yeah, okay.
The technical stuff, I would talk more about the implications for the opt-out movement and a couple other layers to this is what I'm hearing around here. So, okay.
Right. I promise we'll get to that.
Zach, are you saying that the 10% is an incorrect number from NYSED?
I said it's 10% of students and not 10% of schools.
The distinction there, students versus schools.
Just because I think that there should be clarification around that, because there's been a lot of questions even at my board meeting last night around that. And I think it's a really inaccurate statement to be coming from NYSED about something like that. And, it's also stated that it wasn't just the logins, it was once people were logged in. There were also errors with people that had submitted tests that were not submitted. It was, and quite frankly, I don't understand why, if you're understanding, you're seeing the capacity coming in, this is all stuff that should have been done ahead of time. I mean, you knew that you were trying to get more grades on. This was a part of NWEA. I don't understand why NYSED was not more proactive with the space that was being allocated for the testing that was going to be happening.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. I will answer that because I don't want to not answer that. But at this point, debated that. The shorter answer is it was a setting reverted during copying over that should not have occurred. But the system was fine-tuned and was working during the simulation period, and a setting reverted and that. So again, I don't mean to tell you that in any way that therefore this is acceptable or therefore no one should be upset. That is not at all the cause of statement. This was a technical issue that was prepared for correctly and implemented, incorrectly. And again, the department, acknowledges that and apologizes for that and is holding the vendor responsible for where they've dropped the ball.
10% definitely had a lot more impact, a lot more than 10%, because we have early schools and late schools. When the early schools couldn't get on, then we get notified from BOCES to pause testing from the day. Lots of schools on Long Island decided not to test at that point because they could not handle it. So that 10% is really inaccurate because so many schools paused testing before students could even log on.
And that's
What I might say.
accurate. That certainly, we have no way of tracking what decisions people made with the information they were presented, which is all you could do. So, I would never be able to tell you what schools were impacted in that, and you're absolutely right.
Okay, folks, let's hold questions for a minute. Zach, it may be a good idea to, come out, for State Ed to come out with a list of Q&As based on the input that you've gotten this week from everybody, clarifying that 10%. So you may want to, based on the kinds of things you're hearing and have heard, that might be very helpful to dispel what the major questions. Let's move into now what in terms of what you have told school districts, what are their options at this point, and then we'll get into the more what you all anticipate to be the fallout. All right, so Zach maybe just hit a few key items on what you guys expect school districts to do at this point or options.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. So one thing is we do know, as the gentleman just pointed out, some people already made decisions surrounding this because they heard that something was not going well and they said, well, then we're not going to log on, and they adjusted their testing calendar. Obviously, we support that. And, if you have any needs or any help, please contact the Office of State Assessment. We can help you talk through if there are questions or options. We've also attempted to offer more flexibility, not only with the extension of the window, but for example, we have schools that say started on Wednesday, encountered a technical error, decided to pause and said, you know what, it's almost time for April break. Can we resume after? And the answer is yes, absolutely. So we've introduced those flexibilities surrounding the idea of the consecutive days, trying to do that. We are encouraging any schools with specific scenarios to reach out to us, because one of the things we're trying to avoid is making blanket pronouncements, because we want to hear the specific situation you're trying to surmount and see how we can offer support and how we can help in that regard. So those are the immediate mitigations, but we know there are other things that are part of it. One question that I'm not going to take today, but I want to acknowledge that I'm sure you have, and otherwise, is things like accountability and things like that. We are certainly taking, concerns and questions and taking those internally, but, we're not going to come out with an answer on that, today or anything like that. But certainly understand, we know that is on your minds. We have been hearing about it, and we want to be responsive to that and ultimately, have those conversations with you on that. But
There's a question in the that came in through the chat about the NYSES flat. Can you talk a little? It's impacting on this issue. How are the dates overlapping? Can you maybe address that for a minute?
And that, yep, NYSES flat. The biggest thing was to push out. We made a fairly snap decision with Commissioner Rosa to say, you know what, some people are telling us they're going to need more time. Nothing about this was the fault of any school or student or teacher in New York State. So if they're going to need more time, we're going to grant it. We can start to look at some of the other options and see if there are other overlapping things that there might be a concern on. So, I would be happy to, listen to that and, have that conversation and see if there's something that needs to be done to help out schools with that.
One more from the chat room, and this may be just a general question, but maybe you could comment if you've heard anything. It was basically that test modifications were not working even if the kids were logged in. Have you heard that, or what have you heard on that one?
Yes, absolutely. In some cases, and this is why, and I apologize for the technical jargon that I might not even be using correctly, but in some cases, because the servers were overtaxed, what happened is that anybody trying to tap the server for another reason may have gotten rejected. And one of the ways that the server is tapped is to provide text-to-speech to students. So there could absolutely have been instances where students were trying to get their text-to-speech and it was going to the server to retrieve that speech and was unable to. It was limited, but it absolutely happened.
Okay. Why don't we open it up just for a few questions on questions that you may have in regard to what the schools who have had this problem to do regarding the students, just this piece that Jack has talked about now. Any questions on the options that schools have at this point? And then we'll get into the fallout.
I don't even think it's about the options at this point. My main concern is I've been in districts dealing with CBG for the past 8 years. And it started from the scoring part all the way up to where we are now. And the same problems occurred 8 years ago. We're in this 8 years later, and it's the same problems. Why is the web service or the cloud service that's being used not being as robust, or as you put it before with the access controls that are in place? Why is this failing, and why is this happening again?
Mike, thanks for that question. And Ron, I see you shaking your head that resonates with your question as well. Am I correct on that? Good. Okay, Zach?
Yep. So I'll keep this very short because I know I appreciate people's time, and I know we're running here. And that in the past, this was it. You know, it has been multiple errors. So in the past, the only thing is what constituted our migration from physical servers to that was that failure that the gentleman just referred to of years ago. That was actually done on physical servers, and in an effort to rectify that, we moved to virtual servers. The direct answer to why did this happen today is that our vendor made an error. I'm not going to, I will continue to say that, a mistake was made. They will be held responsible financially and otherwise. But I also want to focus on, what we need to do to support kids in the interim and what your schools need from us as well. But absolutely, I will not talk around for a second that a mistake was not made, a very important one that had a lot of wide-reaching impact.
Zach, I'm going to ask a question that you might not be able to answer, and it's just feedback or thought. But, and it's about accountability only because of the 95% participation factor. We were a school district that had 35% opt out before. I finally got them down to only like 4%. And now if they bail and they don't continue, that 95% participation rate is in the factor, and it does account. It does have a factor for us.
Jason, thanks for that.
Understood.
And that leads us perfectly into the next segment of fallout. So Zach, you've clearly heard us moving into that, what we could anticipate. And Jason, just so you know, we will not leave the issue. We will be doggedly pursuing this with state ed. We have a nice relationship, to be honest, with all of the senior managers of state ed. And we've raised accountability and how this could impact it already. And we will be continuing on that. So guaranteed the accountability and the impact on that, we're not going to drop. Zach, any thoughts to Jason's point at this point, as we go into this next and last segment on potential fallout?
Other than I'll go back to what I previously said is we know this is that specific situation, but also other people, are saying that with this, I'm worried about my community, how they're seeing it, or I'm worried about the reactions to that. I am as I think you all know, my colleague Teresa, I am not the accountability person, so I don't want to step on hers, but we already have started having conversations and knowing that we need to, we will need to address this in both the short term, but also as we start to look to determinations. So, we'll be working with Cindy and others, but yes, the biggest thing is letting us know about your experience, and, we're not leaving it at this conversation.
So what do you all anticipate? Let's have a conversation. What has been the fallout date from this in your communities?
The media.
I wouldn't mind starting. The media, every news channel in our area has talked about it, and it's created a tremendous buzz amongst even teachers and some parents that I've spoken to. And going back to basically Jason and then Michael, putting those two options together, it's the opt-out that we've worked so hard and we've been instructed to bring kids back in. I feel like this is just not done a good job, if you want me to be honest. And then on top of that, the fact that kids that don't take it this year are going to be counted as a zero towards our accountability. And that's a new piece that's coming in. So that doesn't feel too good from a principal perspective, if you want me to know, if you really want to know the truth. So that's where my concern is, Zach. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ron.
To echo that, Cindy,
Cindy.
Cindy, to echo that, what Jason and the last gentleman said, we paused testing on Tuesday, and then we got 10% more opt-outs on Wednesday. Parents are like, we're not taking this. So that's a huge hit. That we doubled the amount of opt-outs we had in one night because of things that we've been working really hard to get that number as low as possible. And our fifth grade was our highest number of opt-outs. Third and fourth were not nowhere as near, but now it all came back to where we started from years ago.
And you said fifth, third, and fourth?
Yeah, fifth grade was, historically they were coming down from when they took it in the third and fourth grade, but the third and fourth grade were already much lower than they were
Okay.
when they were previous years.
Thanks.
So I have to say, it's insulting to be asked that question, what is the fallout? Because we know the fallout is impacting students. We have middle school students who are anxious about the test, who now don't know what they're going to be doing for the test. I'm insulted because NYSED and the vendor should have had people in the field knowing what was going to happen, not just signing a contract and giving a mandate to districts to do this. Why not get into the classrooms? Then you don't have to ask that question.
We have the same thing. We have a lot of students who have test anxiety. My son is one of them. And as an educator, I don't want to opt my child out. But watching him go through that for 2 days in sixth grade was horrible. And then he was coming home. He wasn't sleeping because we got him all ready for it. And then he couldn't get on. And these poor kids were sequestered in these rooms for 2.5 hours because we didn't know what was going to go on. And we couldn't send them on their regular day because we were hoping 30 minutes later it would click back on or it would work, and these kids are, like everybody's been saying, we were finally getting everybody back on board and we are making momentum with getting kids and parents back on board with us with this test. And I just feel like this just shot us completely in the foot. And then I'm also concerned with the validity of the test. I don't feel like as a principal, as an educator, I'm going to give two hoots about this ELA test next year when I look at AIS, because some of the kids took it the first day. Some of the kids saw the test but got kicked out. So they talked about it probably at lunch or in Snapchat. I can't control that.
Okay,
They're
let's,
talking about it. There's no validity to this test. And I can't even believe we're going to put these kids back on this platform to make them take this ELA test like that.
thank you, Jill. Thanks. I'm gonna move up to Zachary. That I know that morphs into accountability again, but you have a response in terms of the validity of the test at this point.
And that, yeah, I don't want to. I want to acknowledge everything that's been said because I have a child taking the test as well, and I came on here to talk to you and hear from you. And I'm not going to stand here and say any of your concerns are anything but very valid and otherwise. We will be doing further analyses, further digging. I took this meeting with Cindy because we wanted to hear directly from you these experiences. If you haven't already shared them with us in writing, please, it doesn't have to be today. I know you're all very, very busy. We would absolutely take these from you so that it could be part of the conversations as we consider, what the impacts are moving forward. And how we can best offer the supports, not only directly on the testing side, but with my colleagues in the operations who are working with accountability and otherwise. So,
And Zach,
Zach.
we appreciate you doing this because it takes a lot to stand in front of people after something like this. So thank you.
Jason, thank you for that. Let me, so we've talked about validity, we've talked about increased opt-outs. Anybody have, let's just in our remaining 1 minute, anybody have a different issue or something that we haven't heard about possible fallouts that you've already seen in your community that Zach should know about?
So Cindy,
One at a time or raise a hand. Go ahead. I don't know who hopped in.
Cindy,
I was
I'll go.
hoping to hear about if we can delete data kids that submitted and never had their modifications.
Okay, thank you,
We
Nate.
could help with that right into us, shoot, right to an email. Yes, I can get my team to help you one-on-one with that. Yep.
And I'll send Zach's email out to everybody who was on this session. Nate, want to get you in, and Nate will be our
kind of
last.
a different situation here in Pembroke. We were able to start at 7:45 and everybody got logged in and we were working as normal. Everything seemed to be fine. About an hour in, the system crashed. And then I had to quarantine all the Chromebooks and go on about our day. I was given guidance that it was fixed. So the next day we said we were going to try it again. So we tried it again the next day. Same thing. We got in at 7:45. We were up and running. The system crashed. We were given guidance to keep going offline, keep working offline. The data would be stored locally. Then after the test, I find out that all of my students that have test read accommodations, it doesn't work offline. So maybe a consideration for the future is maybe that's a feature that could be downloaded onto the Chromebook so that if it does go offline, the students, some of our most academically needy students, can still get their testing accommodations. So basically all of my students with disabilities that have tests read did not receive that. And they've completed their tests, they've submitted them, and the extension doesn't help us, with all due respect. It doesn't. The extension for another week doesn't help us at all. We're looking into math now. So.
Yep. No, completely
Hey,
understood.
thank you so much. And Zach, let's continue to work on that. All right. So as Zach and I and not just me, but our whole organizations work with Zach on these issues, I'm going to make a promise to you all that we get this information right back out to you when we get these kinds of responses. I'm okay, Zach, on that one?
Yeah,
Just
no,
keep on
absolutely. And
plugging
I
there.
put in the chat because it's not, I don't want to hide from you all because I'm sure you can find me anyways. Emailing me is not going to get you direct support in that, you're certainly welcome. I will always listen to your concerns or otherwise, but I put that CBT support email in there. And, if you need direct someone to, what should I be doing? Or I have this issue, and that puts you, that's a Zendesk account that immediately goes to multiple team members. So we make sure that you're getting immediate responses on that. So, certainly, I never have a problem with people emailing me. I just don't want you to go, Zach, how do I reset my one? I'm not even sure that I know, but I have a lot of smart people that will call you immediately and make sure you get the handing, get whatever level of support you need.
Zach, can't thank you enough. Thank you all. I know we're not going to solve all of the problems here that you've all run into this week. We feel it. Nate was one of the first people to give me a call. And we've been working on this with Zach and everybody since then. So thank you for keeping in,
Cindy,
close.
if I could.
Yep.
One last word in that, and at this point, as I've told you, I was put out there too. So I certainly don't expect you to take the word for it because Zach says so. But I am, whatever credibility you'll take from me at this point is, we have seen it working. It has worked well today. We know you're going into April break. We know it has to work. We know that the impact on students is unacceptable. So it is our entire, not just expectation, but what we have seen, that you will return, whether it be math or whether it be that, to what it should have been to begin with. And we apologize that it took this to get there, but I do want whatever level of confidence you're able to take, which I certainly understand can be limited. We have pushed, we have seen what we need to, and that we will also push out, and I'll be happy to share these with Cindy. We're going to be continually monitoring and sharing some numbers for people who are over break to say, hey, here is what metrics are. So if you're coming back from break and going, can I start on Tuesday? I don't want you just to go, well, they said it was fine. I want you to go, look, here is the statistics that have been happening since I left off that I can feel more confident. So.
And Zach, I want to make sure that these folks get that, because sometimes those emails might hit a district level before them. So if you could forward that out, and we will get it out on our inbox blast that we do. Zach, I'm also sure that there's over 150 folks on today that if you wanted to get out to any of the districts, they would be more than happy to host any of you. So I also offer that to you in kind. Zach, thank you.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you all.
Appreciate all your time, folks. If you have any more questions, we're going to capture the ones in the chat. I'll get those back into Zach, and I thank you for your time today. Appreciate it all.